The light softened from amber to purple as it glowed through the trees at Thorny Ridge State Park. It would have been a beautiful day if I wasn't in desperate race against the sunset. I was an average runner and cyclist and had injured my knee earlier in the year. I know nobody likes to hear a runner prat on about his training or his injuries, but I promise it's important to this story. It was a few weeks after my knee injury and I was finally walking again. That period where I was homebound was horrible. I'd never experienced depression like that. Running and training had given me a second life in my 30s after losing most of my 20s to working the 100 hours a week at a corporate job. When my knee gave out during a training run, it felt like a betrayal, like my body took away the one thing that was giving me meaning. I was furious, but on that day at Thorny Ridge State Park, I was finally happy. For a little while, that is. It was my first hike since the surgery, and though I took it slow, it was exhilarating to be getting some movement in nature. It was like I'd been without my senses for months and suddenly gained them all back. I smelled the flowers and the earth. I felt the rugged exterior of the old oak trees and the papery bark of the beaches. I tasted air that was freshly filtered through the leaves. I saw squirrels and heard birds and actually broke a sweat. I brought a retractable walking pole that my physical therapist insisted I bring along, but I kept it in my backpack the whole time. I didn't need it. My knee was throbbing, but I wasn't going to debase myself by leaning on a cane like an old man. That afternoon was magnificent. So magnificent that I lost track of time. And before I knew it, I was a mile away from the parking lot as the light turned golden, then amber, then purple. I de-seamed the sign in all caps when I turned off Adelaide Road and into the park 4 hours earlier. Close as at sundown, I could only move so fast. I went through the dusk as quickly as I could, racing the sun back to the parking lot. By the time I emerged from the trail, I knew I was screwed. The lights in the parking lot were on, and my car was the only one there. "Oh no," I said as I dragged myself across the lot. "Rangers couldn't close the gate if someone was in the park, right?" I got to the car and sped out of the parking lot as fast as I safely could. I reminded myself that this was a prime time for deer to be moving around the woods, and I strained my eyes to monitor the trees that crept up to the edge of a thin road out of the park. And before long, the sight that I feared emerged straight ahead, the locked gate. I let loose a sound that was somewhere between a howl and a sob. I eased on the brake and slammed my head into the steering wheel once, twice, and then 3 times. "Damn it," I yelled into my empty car, which was now stopped a few feet away from the locked gate. I put the car in park and took the deepest breath I could imagine. I looked to each side of the gate to see if I could maneuver around it. Deep ditches ran along the sides of the road, so my little Chevy Impala wasn't going to be able to get down into the ditch and back up on the other side of the gate. I was an hour from my home in the city. I had wanted to get away from the sound and the crowds to get a little time in nature, and now it seemed like I was going to get a whole night in nature. I could call a friend, but it was so embarrassing. Besides, there was still one last bit of hope I had left. Through the trees to my left, I could see the lights of the park's visitor center. If there happened to be a staff member still in the park, or if there was some number to call after hours, chances were I could find them at the visitor center. Still wearing my hiking backpack, I turned the car off and hopped out. I hustled up the path to the visitor center as fast as my aching knee let me. A chilly breeze swept through the woods. The jagged leaves of elm trees along the path threatened me like floating saw blades. The visitor center was little more than 2 bathrooms and a map of the park. There was a door that said office on it, but that door was locked. There were 2 bathrooms. I pounded on the office door and yelled for help, but the only answer was the breeze rattling the trees. I looked at the map of the park to see if there was another way out. I could barely make out the map under the layer of scratched up plastic that encased it. I looked for Adelaide Road, which was where I entered the park, just to get my bearings about where the hell I was on this map in the first place. I was looking so closely through the plastic that I wasn't paying attention to the figure and its reflection. Something was approaching me from behind, but I didn't notice it until it grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. I yelled as I turned to myself face to face with a panicked park ranger. She wasn't wearing her hat, and her uniform hung in tatters from her shivering body. I smelled blood and sweat, and when she spoke, her breath writhed a bile. "It's sundown," she said. "You have to leave." "Well, I want to," I said, "but the gate." The ranger dug around in her pocket and pulled out a keyring. She shoved it into my hand. "Now run," she said. Then she turned and hacked up a bloody gob of spit. Her torso spasmed and her legs shook as she spat. "My God, are you okay?" I asked. "I could help you. I could drive you somewhere if you need help." She spun back towards me and locked her bloodshot eyes with mine. "They can't leave the park," she said. I didn't have time to ask her who she was talking about before she turned and started to run to the forest. Then she stopped dead in her tracks. Her back straightened like a mirroring net that just had its string pulled. Then she began bending backwards. I could hear her vertebrae in her spine popping one by one as her body bent unnaturally. I stood rooted to the ground in horror as the ranger completed her cursed backbend and landed on her hands. Blood poured from her mouth, coating her face in a crimson mask. Her eyes, which now seemed bleach white against the waterfall of blood, bulged from their sockets, and then, as if attached to two strings, they disappeared into her head. The two sockets stared blankly ahead. The ranger's chest heaved again, and the torrent of blood from her mouth stopped. Something seemed to work its way through her spasming torso and up her throat. A fist-sized eye emerged from her mouth. Two pincers, as long as butcher knives, poked out from the empty eye sockets. The eyes fixed its gaze on me. The pincers clacked together. Then the thing that used to be the park ranger started crawling at me. I turned and I ran. Well, I turned and stumbled as quickly as I could. My knees screamed, but my terrified mind screamed louder. Adrenaline muffled the pain in my knee, at least for the moment. Fortunately, the crawling ranger moved slowly. I was halfway back to my car when something scuttled into the path between me and my vehicle. Even in the dim light of dusk, I knew it was another one of those things. I skidded to a stop and my hamster wheel of a brain spun into a higher gear. I looked back to the ranger who was still pursuing me. The ranger's words came to me. "Then they can't leave the park." She had been referring to these creatures, these crawlers. I turned off the path toward Adelaide Road and plunged into the woods. The crawlers were hot on my tail already. I couldn't tell whether the sounds behind me were branches snapping or pincers clacking together. The ranger's keys still jangled in my pocket, though I didn't think I need them anymore. I was moving away from the gate, now through the dense underbrush in the direction I hoped would lead me to the road. I knew there had to be some kind of compass app on my phone, but I didn't have time to go scrolling through it. I barely had time to turn on the flashlight to light my way. I didn't dare look back as I navigated roots and rocks that were slick with dirt and moss. I stumbled here and tripped there, but didn't fall down as I advanced through the trees. "Help!" I called out as if someone would hear me and be able to fend off the crawlers, but I had no idea what else to say. 20 feet in front of me, another crawler dropped out of a tree, almost like it was replying to my cry for help. I didn't break stride as I turned slightly to the right, and then more of them dropped out of the trees. I could see them out of my peripheral vision. I heard them clacking and stumbling their way through the forest. I even thought I heard a couple of them scream. I yelled too as terror took hold of my body. My knee was the farthest thing from my mind. I'd moved faster than I'd gone in months. I clenched my phone like it was my last lifeline. And maybe it was, unless I had to fight them. A new wave of panic swept through me. I hadn't thought about what it might be like to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the beast with pincers. What it would be like for those knife-like appendages to rip through my flesh, to slash through my tendons, to crack my bones. These things had all been human before, hadn't they? Their shapes in the dark had all looked human-sized, like they had all contorted themselves into these forms, just like the park ranger had. Christ, could these things turn me into one of them? Would I never leave this park again? As I thought about it, an idea came to me. I stopped screaming. I even felt the smile break across my face. I needed to get to higher ground. Ideally, I wanted to get into a tree. I shone the flashlight around, looking for a tree that had a low enough branch for me to climb. No, not that one. You'd pay. Maybe that one. No, that one. A low, wide elm tree stretched its limbs before me. And in that moment, it was the most beautiful, welcoming tree I'd ever seen. I ran toward it and started to take off my backpack. I cast the glance back to see how close the crawlers were to me. They were still right there, just out of arm's reach, and it looked like there were more than a dozen of them now. I tucked the backpack under my right arm, keeping my phone in my right hand to light the way. With the backpack secured, I reached into it with my left hand. I stumbled a little as I rummaged through the backpack, and I could hear the clacking of pincers right behind me. Panic raced through my mind like a shooting star. No, like a whole meteor shower. My hand closed around the item I needed from my backpack, and I pulled it out. I let the backpack fall. I heard the gnashing of pincers and the shredding of fabric behind me. I reached the tree and leapt onto the first branch. I must have launched off of my good leg, because as soon as I planted my other leg on the branch, my knee buckled and pain detonated. I screamed. I nearly fell to the ground as well. I dropped my phone and grabbed a branch above me. I pulled myself up with my arms and my good leg. Now, luckily, my phone landed with the light facing up so I could see the way. Then the light disappeared. The crawlers had caught up. I hoisted myself onto one last branch and turned to face my pursuers. I unfurled the collapsible trekking pole in my hand and locked it into place. Then I removed the plastic covering from the metal tip at the end of the pole. I could only see the crawlers' silhouettes against the light of my phone and the little bit of moonlight that was peeking through the elm tree's branches. I was grateful that the eye that poked from each of their faces was fist-sized. They were easy targets. I plunged the end of the hiking pole into the eye of the first crawler that climbed its way up the tree, and it shrieked. Where that shriek came from, I can't be sure. Was it the same mouth that now held that enormous eyeball? Or was it from the eye sockets that were now mouths for the pinchers? Their warped biology made no sense to me. The only thing that made sense at that moment was piercing each of those damn eyeballs with my hiking pole. And that's what I did. Crawler after crawler made its way up the tree, and I stabbed frantically down at each of them. I would pierce an eye and then kick the crawler down. I was glad to be wearing thick-soled hiking boots as I kicked blindly towards these pincer-wielding beasts. Stab kick, stab kick. You see, I got into the rhythm of it like a game of messy whack-a-mole. Liquid of some kind seeped onto my hiking socks. Blood oozed from the eyes, some other horrifying fluid. I have no idea, and it felt like it took forever. My whole body was sore from balancing on the branch, stabbing and kicking. And by the end of it, however long it took, I was perched above a twitching, quivering sea of limbs. The crawlers were blindly flailing about, tripping over each other and stumbling over roots and rocks. Some of them even had turned on each other, gnawing at whatever limbs they could find. Screaming and confused squealing echoed through the night, drifting through the trees on the breeze. I sat above the chaos like a god of a cursed civilization. My trekking pole dripped with the same ghastly liquid that soaked my boots, socks, and pants. I waited for what seemed like another eternity as the crawlers eventually dispersed. They wriggled back into the darkness, which was now even darker for them without their eyes. Now, the only eye that looked up at me was the unblinking flashlight on my cell phone. I waited a few minutes more just to be sure that I was alone. Then I climbed down slowly until my feet were on solid ground. I picked up the phone and I looked around. The ground was muddy and torn up in the wake of the panic. I didn't stick around to examine it. I navigated to the phone's compass app, made sure I was walking in the right direction, and set off for Adelaide Road. I leaned on my trekking pole as I did so, hoping I hadn't done terrible damage to my knee. I limped through the night, casting frequent glances behind me to make sure that there wasn't a crawler accompanying me. I did hear the occasional screech in the forest, but it was hard to distinguish between normal nighttime animal sounds and the cries of the crawlers. When Adelaide Road came into view, I broke into a herky-jerky run. Something onto that asphalt was as euphoric as any finish line I'd ever crossed. I didn't realize how many emotions I was keeping at bay during my ordeal. I had to push aside the fear and the stress of the moment in favor of my battle for survival. And once I set foot onto that road, those emotions came surging up. Unlike the battalion of crawlers earlier in the night, I couldn't keep this force at bay. I fell to my knees and I sobbed. Everything running and cycling had done for me in my 30s, tonight was doing for me once again. This was another new start in a way, and I was able to make the most of it. I stood up again and walked along the side of the road. Eventually, I flagged down a car, apologized for my mésalliances, and offered to pay the driver whatever he wanted for a ride to the nearest hotel. He obliged and had the decency not to ask me any questions about how the hell I ended up soaked in a foul-smelling goo from my knees down. A few minutes later, I was in front of the Thorny Ridge Motel, and my very kind driver was speeding away. I had no doubt that his windows were rolled down to air out his car. I watched the shrinking red lights of his car. Then I looked back the way we came toward Thorny Ridge State Park. I was surprised to feel a pull to go back that way. I wasn't sure if it was curiosity or if I was nervous about my car being there alone. The buzzing of the vacancy sign pulled me back to the moment I shook off the pole to go back to the park and walk to the motel office. It was every bit as filthy as I expected, with a wall calendar that was a year and 4 months behind. Still, it seemed like the newest thing in this room. The motel keeper was an old man with greasy gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. A wet cough exploded from his denture-filled mouth as I walked in. "Help you, sir?" he asked. "Just a room for the night," I said. "I hope you take cards." "We bet you do," he croaked. "Got one of these new slide devices. You could just swipe your charge card through there, and thanks to the magic of technology, you'll be contributing to my retirement fund." He winked at me, and I could hear his eyelid click. It reminded me of the pincers in the park. I slid my card, got the key, and went up to my room. I still looked around as I made my way up the stairs to my room. I turned the key and pushed the door open, brandishing my trekking pole as if crawlers were going to rush out from the darkness of the room, but there was nothing. I mean, of course, there was nothing. They can't leave the park. That ranger had said so. I went in. I locked the door and I slid a dresser in front of it, checked under the bed, examined the closet, and turned on the shower. I stripped down and I washed the sweat, blood, and goo off of me. It wasn't until I was sitting on the bed after the shower that I saw the marks. 2 small wounds on my lower calf, ice crackling through my chest as I realized what those wounds were from. One of those things bit me. I hadn't felt it. That same adrenaline that kept my knee pain at bay had kept me from feeling the pain of a pincer bite. I barely slept. Every drip of water from the shower or sink was the splat of fluid from a wounded eye. Every car passing by was a swarm of crawlers. Every distant sound in another room was the scuttling of a monster. And I still felt that pull to return to the park. After I finally fell asleep, I woke up to find myself sitting on the edge of my bed, tying my boots. I kicked them off and burrowed back under the covers. And for the second time that year, I felt like my body was betraying me. Sunrise finally came and I called an Uber with the last of my remaining phone battery. I smelled slightly better during this car ride, though my pants and socks were still noxious. The driver dropped me at the front gate, which was still locked. Fortunately, I still had the key from the park ranger. I asked the Uber driver to stay until I had unlocked the gate and started my car. I didn't want to take any chances though. There was a part of me that wouldn't mind getting stuck there again. Something about the smell of the earth and the sound of the leaves in the wind felt like home. I cycled through the keys from the ranger until I got one to work. I unlocked the padlock and swung open the gates. I hung the key ring from the padlock for the rangers to find later. Then I went over to my car and started the engine. I waved at the Uber driver who then took off. Then I turned my car off. I got out of my car and looked up that little path to the visitor center. I felt a throbbing in my leg, but not where I'd felt it for months. It wasn't from my knee, but from the wound a little lower in the leg, and it wasn't painful. It was soothing, like when you rub ointment on a mosquito bite. I took a step forward to the visitor center, then another and another, and on my next step, my knee buckled and I fell to the ground. As I knelt on the road, I felt my mind clear. I had to leave this place, I had to. I hobbled back to my car, turned the key, and took off. I didn't look back. As I drove farther away from the park, that throbbing from my pincer wound gave way to the throbbing in my knee. I felt that euphoria I had experienced the night before when I made it out of the park. The life I was driving toward was better than the one I was leaving behind. I rubbed my knee lovingly for the first time in months, but I'd nearly given in to the pull of the park, hadn't I? But my body hadn't betrayed me this time. It saved me. It's a couple months later and the pincer wound is mostly healed now. So is my knee. It is a little past sunset and I could feel that pull to go back to Thorny Ridge State Park. I could smell that soil and hear those leaves rustling. I could hear the popping of vertebrae and the clacking of pincers. I hope that feeling will fade as the night goes on. It usually does, and I hope I'm strong enough to resist it this and every night going forward.